That worship segues so well into God's word for us today. It's all about grace and this God who moves on our behalf and runs toward us. So we're in week 2 of It Was Always About Grace. This sermon series, we're tracing the themes of grace that run from Leviticus all the way to Jesus. And I'm convinced, I think Leviticus might be one of the most misunderstood books in our Bible. For me, it started to shift when I learned how to read this book in the context of its larger narrative. You see, Leviticus is right in the middle of the Torah. The first 5 books of our Bible make a complete set. And the Torah was meticulously, intentionally crafted to tell one story. So, Leviticus is the answer to one of the Bible's greatest cliffhangers. For that, we need to look at Exodus. Quick overview. Exodus begins with a small group of slaves under the thumb of the tyrant Pharaoh in Egypt. God rescues these slaves by grace alone. He actually makes sure to remind them multiple times that they did nothing to earn it, that they were kind of worthless slaves, but that God loved them, and so he saved them by sheer grace. So God takes these Israelites into the wilderness, eventually to the promised land. Now, along the way, the last major section of Exodus, it deals with chapter after chapter of all of these building instructions. They're building the tabernacle, and there's all these details. The tabernacle would eventually become the building of the temple on Mount Zion. But early on, God was on the move with his people, and so it was this mobile tent that followed them around in the wilderness. It was the place where Israel could go and worship Yahweh. And the last several chapters are all these building designs and details. And now, I know, when we come to those long lists of details, to those long lists of names in our Bible, that's when a lot of us fall asleep. It's all right, let's be honest. So here is my pro tip for how to approach passages like that. When you come to those passages, your first question is, what would Hollywood do with this part of the story? Really, because a movie director would take these several chapters of building designs, push it into maybe a 3-minute montage, and you wouldn't have any dialogue. You would just see curtains being raised, wood being cut, incense being burned, all with the backdrop of some epic soundtrack. Can you picture it? It would actually be pretty riveting. So in the ancient world, they didn't have screens and cinema. They had to use their imagination more. And so the first listeners could close their eyes, and they would listen to all these details being read out, and they could actually picture the building being raised up. So try that next time you come across one of those passages. It's helped me make it a little more exciting. But the details of this particular tabernacle, they are actually pretty interesting. God is carefully crafting a space for Israel to come and worship him. And he takes great care to activate all of their senses. Down to the color of the curtain is handpicked by God. The sounds of the instruments being used is going to activate your hearing. Even the smell. God has a particular formula for the perfume that was to be used exclusively in this worship setting. So as an Israelite, you're coming to worship God, and all of you is being activated when you do this. So they get to work for weeks, probably months, building this mobile tent that would be their place of worship. We're going to look at the last paragraph of Exodus, chapter 40, in just a little bit. But first, I want us to relate with where they might have been at. Have you ever put all this energy and effort and planning into a project only to have it fall apart at the last minute? Anybody? That's all right. Have you ever put all this energy into a project and then it just falls apart at the last minute? Can you think of a moment? So for me, I have to go back to junior year of high school. Our physics department had a tradition where we had to get into groups, and the students, we had to create a boat out of just paper, glue, and paint that could actually float a teacher across the school pool. Yeah. So Melanie, we're actually high school sweethearts. We were at the same high school. Melanie has a group, her girlfriends get together, and they had enlisted Miss Snow, the science teacher. And oh my gosh, they showed up, and their boat was immaculate. I mean, it had perfect right angles. It looked like a canoe that they could have purchased at REI that morning. They even created an oar out of paper and glue that worked. Okay, so Miss Snow gets into the boat on launch day, and I don't even think it displaced any water. She just sat down and calmly and pristinely rows her canoe across the pool, to the shame of us all. You only had to go across one length, But just to rub it in, Miss No just calmly turns the boat around and goes back for a second take. I mean, it was overkill, let's be honest. So then my guys step up to the plate. We had a group, and we had enlisted our water polo coach, Coach O'Day. Now, he was Irish, and so we thought it would be funny to name our boat the Blarney Stone. It's a famous rock in Ireland. Anyone been there? I don't know. So in retrospect, it's a bad omen to name something you want to float after a famous rock. So sure enough, we get our boat in the water. We're so proud of it. And then our coach takes one step into that boat, and we see it start to sink to the bottom of the pool. I mean, weeks of planning and cutting and gluing and painting. We get to launch day, and there's our project sinking to the bottom of the pool. I think I can relate with where the Israelites might have been at the end of Exodus. So we're almost ready to look at this big cliffhanger I mentioned. One historical note that'd be really helpful to understand. So this tent that they're building has two names in the Hebrew. The first name or title is the dwelling place. So that refers to the place where God's presence will dwell. The second title this same tent gets is the meeting place, or the meeting tent. So that refers to us. Can we go to meet with this God? Because it's one thing to have God dwell in our midst. It's another thing for me to have access. Can I open the door and actually meet with him? So the big question at the end of Exodus is, can the dwelling place become the tent of meeting? So with that, we get to the end after all this planning and building, cutting, sewing. Exodus chapter 40, starting at verse 33. When Moses had finished all the work, the cloud covered the meeting tent, and the Lord's glorious presence filled the dwelling. Moses couldn't enter the meeting tent because the cloud had settled on it. And the Lord's glorious presence filled the dwelling. Whenever the cloud rose from the dwelling, the Israelites would set out on their journeys, but if the cloud didn't rise, they didn't set out until the day that it rose. So they get all the way to the end. They get to launch day, and it looks like this whole project is about to sink because not even Moses can enter. If we're just one of the average Israelites at this moment, I think we're thinking, wait, hold on. If Moses can't enter, what hope do I have? Moses has already, by the way, entered the cloud of the presence of God. Just a few chapters earlier, God's presence descended on Mount Sinai. All of the Israelites had to stay at the foot of the mountain. Moses alone was invited to come up and meet with God. Moses has already been invited into the presence of God, and now we get to the very end, and not even Moses can enter. Like, what's going on here? If we're just one of the Israelites looking on, we're thinking, did all that work? Wait, wasn't that the whole point? I thought we were building this so we could come and meet with God, and now it looks like our project is sinking to the bottom of the pool. Who can enter? Do we have any access to this God? So at the end of Exodus, here's the big cliffhanger. It is indeed the dwelling place. God's presence is there, but it does not look like it's the tent of meeting. How do we reconcile that? What do we do? And that's where you read this as a narrative. The very next line of the story is Leviticus 1:1. It is the answer to that great cliffhanger. We're actually going to look at just one line of Leviticus today, but it's so good. So Leviticus 1:1. Then the Lord called to Moses and said to him from the meeting tent. God makes the first move. God speaks first. And really, the whole book of Leviticus is God saying, I do want you to meet with me. Here's how it's going to go. God initiates the relationship with all of us. And that is crucial. Because if right here, Moses makes the first move, it's all over. Like Moses could have reached that barrier, and he could have jumped right into brainstorming mode. He said, all right, guys, bring out my whiteboard. Let's brainstorm this. What went wrong? How do we get access? What sort of act of devotion do we need to do? How do we prove to this God that we're serious? Come on, let's get all of our ideas up on the board. What do we do to show our God that we're devoted and that we're worthy to enter his presence? If Moses had made the first move, it would have been all been over. Because then Israel is just like every other religion. The religions that say you have to make the first move. You have to prove that you're worthy to enter God's presence. You have to go through some fanatical dance to get God to pay attention to you. That's what the religions in the pagan world were like. This makes me go to a scene much later in Israel's history. there's a showdown, this famous showdown between the prophet Elijah and 400 prophets of Baal up on Mount Carmel. So they're both parties are trying to get their gods to answer them, to pay attention. And so the prophets of Baal go first, and day and night, they start crying out louder and louder. They start dancing. At one point, they become so fanatical in their worship that they actually start cutting themselves, hoping that that extreme show of devotion might get Baal to pay attention to them. And nothing works. And then Elijah steps forward with a small, simple prayer, and Yahweh responds with power and fire. See, it's the gods like Baal that demand that we go through some hoop, some fanatical act of worship to prove that we're worthy. And then, as I've been reflecting on this, I realized, we don't call them gods anymore. We don't use words like Baal or Zeus or Marduk, but those gods and their influence are still very much alive in our culture today. So many influences in our culture say you need to prove that you're worthy. You need to justify your existence. You need to make the first move so that you can enter. And so, as a culture, we run to the God of success. And we just think, if I just spend more of my time, my health, my family on the altar of success, then maybe I'll be worth something. And it leaves us empty. Or we run to the God of image. Especially now with all of our smartphones and social media, we think if I just airbrush that photo and put a fake happy picture of my family online, that I'll be loved and accepted. And we do it at the expense of our authentic selves and our real relationships. Or we as a culture run to the God of pleasure. We think if I just give in to every whim that comes my way, I'll be truly satisfied. And it just leaves us empty and thirsty for more. See, those are the gods like Baal that demand you make the first move. You justify your existence. You make yourself worthy. Some people think that that's our God too. Like you have to get your life in order and be completely perfect before you enter the doors of a church. But Yahweh, from the first to the last, he is the God who makes the first move. He says, no, you're not the one who has to prove yourself worthy. I initiated this relationship with you. I want to look at two snapshots with us to really underline this character trait of God. This is the God who takes the first step. So we're going to look at one place in the Old Testament, one in the New Testament. There's almost an endless amount of examples we could go to, but two really powerful moments, one in the Old, one in the New, just to underline this character of God. So first, we're going to look at Genesis 15 in a little bit. Let me give the background. So Genesis 15 is this powerful moment when God is ratifying his covenant with Abraham. He's made these promises to Abraham, to all of his descendants, and he's ratifying this covenant with him. And so he comes together, and they perform what looks to us a strange ritual. See, in the ancient world, if two dignitaries were going to come into an agreement together, create some sort of covenant treaty, if two heads of state were going to create a treaty together, what they would do, they didn't have lawyers to draft up legal documents for you to sign on the dotted line. Instead, they cut a covenant together. There was this actual legal ceremony that was well known in the ancient world. And what they would do is they would take animals, they would cut them in half, and they would put them in two rows on the ground with a path in between. Okay? I know it's a little graphic for us, but this is how you cut a deal in the ancient world. Two rows of animals with a path in between. And then the two dignitaries would proclaim their vow to follow the covenant. I will uphold my end of the deal. And then they would walk through the pieces. It was a way of solemnly declaring, if I break my end of the bargain, may what happened to these animals happen to me. So they would walk through the pieces. So this is what God is setting up with Abraham. He tells him, go get some animals. Abraham knows exactly what to do. So he sets it up just like a solemn treaty ceremony. And then something miraculous happens. See, Abraham doesn't take one step down that path, which is really good news for us. Because if Abraham took one step down that path, he would have been binding himself and all of humanity to perfect obedience and righteousness before God. If Abraham takes a step down that path, he's binding himself to say, I will be true to this covenant with the Creator God. Abraham doesn't get a chance to take a single step down that path. Instead, in Genesis 15, he is put into a deep sleep. And then when he wakes, we read this in verse 17. After the sun had set and darkness had deepened, a smoking vessel with a fiery flame passed between the split open animals. That day, the Lord cut a covenant with Abraham. To your descendants I give this land, from Egypt's river to the great Euphrates. Abraham sees two images walking through the pieces, a smoking vessel and a fiery torch. God walked through twice. Do you realize what this means? See, God walked through the first time, as if to say, well, I'm God, so of course I'm going to uphold my end of the deal. But you, Abraham, when you and humanity break your end of the deal, I'm the one that's going to die. When you sin against me and rebel against my purposes for you, I'm the one that's going to take the punishment. God walked through twice. And he binds himself as the creator God to both sides of the deal. He's taking on humanity's commitment and God's commitment in this one moment. I mean, this is incredible. This is maybe one of the earliest and clearest pictures I can find straight to Jesus. I mean, think about it. Thousands of years before Jesus came into our world, God had already promised, when you all break your end of the bargain, I'm the one that's going to die. It's incredible. So this is the God who made the first move. And then just to take it full circle, we're going to look briefly at Romans chapter 5, verse 6 through 10. You could really see that this is like the answer to that promise God made with Abraham so many thousands of years before. In Romans 5, verse 6 through 10, verse 6 says, while we were still weak, at the right moment, Christ died for ungodly people. Verse 8 says, but God shows his love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And verse 10 said, if we were reconciled to God through the death of his son, while we were still enemies, now that we have been reconciled, how much more certain is it that we will be saved by his life? What I love about this is it doesn't say, when God saw that you were trying to get your life together, he decided to give you a helping hand. It doesn't say, when God could tell that your heart was really sorry, that's when he decided to take a step toward you. No, it says that while we were still enemies of God, before a thought had even crossed your mind to turn back to the Lord, he had already paid that price. He had already taken a step of grace toward all of us. So whether you enter the Bible in Genesis or Leviticus or Romans or all the way to the present day, God is and has always been the God who takes the first step. He has always been the God of grace. This is one of that one line in Leviticus, God speaking out from the tent of meeting, was one of the reasons that convinced me that Leviticus was always about grace. Because you see, it's the same God, the same character. From beginning to end is the God who initiates the relationship with us, not making us jump through some hoops, come up with some frantic way of worshiping to prove to God that we're serious, that we're worthy. God is the one who moves first. Because it's always been about grace. I want to take a step back and help us just reflect, maybe on a more human level, to the power of this incredible truth. Let's take it down to our human relationships. Can you think of anyone in your life, maybe years ago or more recently, who took that first step towards you? Anyone in your life who showed you some incredible grace? Maybe it was an invitation into a community. Maybe it was a job offer that you didn't think you deserved. Maybe it was someone who took that first step to mend the relationship with you, who offered some sort of forgiveness or reconciliation before you thought you were worthy. Has there ever been a time, someone in your life who's taken that kind of step towards you? For me, I'm transplanted back to middle school. I was a pretty awkward kid, not very athletic, and I was on the Pop Warner football team. If I'm honest, I was kind of terrified of the whole ordeal the entire time. And one night, I remember getting dropped off to practice, and it was raining, and I didn't get the memo that practice was canceled, so no one else was on the field. One other student gets dropped off, this guy Grant. He was in my grade, and he was bigger, taller, faster than all of us. He was also a part of the group that was like the coolest kids on campus that I was never invited into. And so I'm looking around thinking, I guess I got to find a way home. And Grant walks across the field and sees me there in my pads and says, hey, do you want to run some drills together? Okay, first, part of me was very terrified because he was really much bigger than me. The other part of me, though, was like, I have never received this kind of one-on-one invitation from someone like Grant. Like, he really was out of my league. And I felt like this is this incredible opportunity. I have to say yes. And so for the next hour in the mud and the rain, we ran drills together. And as a seventh grader, it was one of the high moments of my life. I also, reflecting later, I realized this was not a one-off for Grant. He was also the kid who, we had a biking group. We would bike to school every morning. And even though he was at the front of the pack, he would often circle back around to make sure that us stragglers were still a part of the group. And so, just as I reflect on how that made me feel as an awkward little seventh grader to be invited in by someone like Grant, how much more incredible that the God of the universe takes the first step toward me, toward all of us. How much more amazing that God is the one that says, I initiated this before you did anything. While you were still enemies, you had turned your back on your Creator, and God is already initiating His incredible grace. God makes the first move every single time. I want to give us a chance to respond to this. There's two main ways that I think this message is compelling me to respond. And one, I want to talk, anyone in this room, or maybe you're listening online, and you're hearing this message of a God of grace, the God who initiates, and you're thinking, man, I really need that. I don't have that right now. I need God to take that first step toward me. Maybe you said yes to Jesus at some point in your life, but you've been running from Him ever since. Or maybe today is the first time that you've come up against this incredible message. God has initiated a relationship with you. He wants to offer you forgiveness and life. And you're starting to think, maybe I do want that. Just an invitation. I would love for you to come and talk to me afterwards. I would love to hear your story, to answer some questions, pray with you. Maybe today is the day that you start receiving that invitation, receiving that grace from this God who made the first move on your behalf. We don't have to justify our existence before this God. We don't have to keep running ourselves dry and empty, trying to prove our worth with this God. He made the first move for you. So if that's you, please come talk to me. I'd love to pray with you after the service. And then I want to talk to everyone else. Maybe we've accepted that grace. We know that good news. God has made the first move. He's the one that died for me. What do I do about it now? First, what comes to mind, this is the words from one of Jesus' own disciples, John, in his letter. If we could put that up there. Do we have it? That's okay. In 1 John, it's a simple verse. He says that we love because He first loved us. John, who followed Jesus and saw Him give His life for us. John is then writing to the church later, and he says, hey, we get to love because He first loved us. So we who have already received God's love and grace, we've received that invitation to come into a relationship with Him. I think one of the great opportunities that we have is that we get to be the people that take the first step towards somebody else. Is there someone in your life who you can take a step toward in grace this week? Maybe it's an invitation into something. Maybe it's a word of encouragement. Maybe there's a relationship that you can be the first one to seek to mend, to reach out with some grace this week. Is there a way that because we have received this incredible love and grace from God, we can take that first step towards someone else this week? So I'm going to pray for us and invite the band to come on up. And in this next song, I think it's a great opportunity to just be in awe of this God who, from the beginning to the end, the very beginning of the story, God was the one who was making the first move. The very end of the story, God is the one who makes the first move. We don't have to prove our worth. We don't have to justify our existence before this God. So I'm going to pray for us, and maybe let's use this song as a way to just praise God and be in awe of his incredible, incredible grace.